Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Somni Sambu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, Democrats in the House of Representatives are pushing Vice President Mike Pence and the cabinet to oust Trump, saying he is unfit for office after encouraging the protest march that turned into a mob which ransacked the U.S. Capitol in a deadly siege. Democrats are grappling with how to manage the impeachment and a trial in the Senate, while Biden is getting his administration up and running. What could happen if the 25th Amendment isn't invoked? We'll speak to Professor Val Okaru-Bisant, a USA Nigerian trained attorney. And later, the World Bank projects a global economic expansion of 4% in 2021, assuming an initial COVID-19 vaccine rollout becomes widespread throughout the year. Meanwhile, Nigeria's economy is expected to resume at 1.1%. Analysts say they see opportunities for African economies despite the COVID-19 pandemic shocks. We have analysis coming up. Members of Congress are pursuing methods to force President Donald Trump to leave office after blaming Trump for inciting the deadly assault on the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday in support of his false claims of election fraud. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the House will proceed with legislation to impeach President Donald Trump as she pushes the Vice President and the Cabinet to invoke constitutional authority to force him out, warning that Trump is a threat to democracy and could do more damage before he leaves office. Last week, an angry mob overpowered police, broke through security lines and windows, and rampaged through the Capitol, forcing lawmakers to scatter as they were finalizing Biden's victory over Trump in the Electoral College. Let's take a listen to
House
this.
Resolution 21, a resolution calling on Vice President Michael R. Pence to convene and mobilize the principal officers of the executive departments of the Cabinet to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare President Donald J. Trump incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president.
So there's a real thinking among Democrats that they want to push off a Senate trial, even if that means that Donald Trump will not be convicted. And so what the discussion is right now is moving the Senate trial back until after Biden's first 100 days in office. The reality is that that is a lifetime away in Washington, and we really don't know what Washington will look like at that point. We don't know what Joe Biden's presidency will look like. We don't know what the state of the country will be with regards to the pandemic or the economy or so many other things. And so I think ultimately what that means is that there's real uncertainty about what happens to this impeachment. One thing that is being talked about is, could you pass a measure on the Hill to essentially prevent Trump from ever running again? He has flirted with the idea of running in 2024. That is also a long time away, and we don't know what would really happen, but this would block that avenue. And that's something that could be both linked to impeachment, but it also could be done separately. And that's one of the things that lawmakers are trying to sort through right now.
All right, for analysis, I'm now being joined via Cisco WebEx by Professor Val Okaru-Bisant, the CEO, General Counsel, and founder of Afrocosmo Development Impact. She's a U.S. Nigerian trained attorney. Good to have you, Prof. And really good to see you again. How have you been coping in the midst of all this chaos, political chaos in the U.S.?
Well, so far so good. It's been quite stressful for everybody. It's been really very traumatic, especially watching those, I don't want to call them mobsters or, protesters. They're actually rioting. They were really, it was like a coup d'etat. It's really been very traumatic for everybody, but we're coping okay. I say when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And of course, as you can see, the Congress is coping really, so far, coping well with it, especially the Democratic Congress.
difficult times for the American presidency and Americans as a whole. We have the Congress actually asking Vice President Mike Pence to do what many have said would be very difficult to do, considering the relationship between this president and his vice in the past 4 years. And since they just have a few days to go, it will be difficult for Mike Pence to do that. But if this 25th Amendment is not invoked, and this motion that is already on the floor right now continues, do you foresee Trump being impeached for a second term?
Well, let me tell you this: it's like playing Russian roulette. Don't hold me accountable. But I foresee that they may impeach him. The House may impeach him because Nancy Pelosi, right now, as you know, has decided that they will impeach tomorrow. They actually have written the articles. The Judiciary Committee of Democrats have written the articles of impeachment. Raskin of Maryland is one of the leaders of that, right? The next step now is for them this evening, today, on Tuesday, to see if they can convince Mike Pence. As you said, the chances are that he may not invoke the 25th Amendment. And let's also bear in mind that he's not alone. He's not the only one that will have to do it. The 25th Amendment at Section 4 actually requires that not just Pence, but Pence and the majority of cabinet or Congress invoke the 25th Amendment. And as he rightly said, he has a good relationship with Trump, even though Trump deserted him, or Trump supporters. Remember, they were chanting, "Oh, let's hang Trump, let's hang Pence," when they were going to Capitol Hill. So really, I foresee that they may impeach him, but the House will try to impeach him tomorrow. And they have enough votes in the House, as you know, because they're the majority. The question is whether or not Senate, when it goes to Senate will convict. Because as you know, Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House, and the House dominates right now, the House of Rep, right? They are the majority. So they have enough votes already right now, haven't written the articles of impeachment. They have enough votes to impeach. But like I said, the House, the Senate may not convict him. The chances are that they will not. They don't have enough votes because right now the Republicans are the majority in Senate. Even though we know that Ossoff and Warnock won, but they're not going to assume their seats yet until after the elections. So really, I think it's still worth it, really, to impeach him, because it may have a good impact on preventing him from running in 2024. As we all know, he plans to run in 2024. Plus, it might be a deterrent effect. It might serve as a deterrent effect on others that may want to emulate what Trump has done, inciting insurgents, right? Inciting violence. It doesn't really make sense. So there are really different reasons. There might not be any effect really on his supporters. Impeachment won't have any effect on them because he's already planted that seed. They're really fired up, as President Obama says, fired up to commit all kinds of atrocities right now. And as you know, they're going to be rioting again from, I believe, the 16th of January until the election, the inauguration on January 20. So there's a lot. It's very fluid right now, actually. So I foresee impeachment, but only at the House, like I said. But it may not have any impact at when it gets to the House. Yeah. I don't think.
These are interesting times, Prof. Let's take a look at, if you can hear me, Prof. Oh, okay. Now, let's take a look at the charge. You are a law professor, and what the charge that the Democrats are bringing against Trump is on incitement of insurrection. What does that really mean to the average American, and what should they make of this charge?
Well, it's like having an insurgency. I think I used the word insurgency. It's like a coup d'etat, so to speak. Violence, inciting. If you listen to his video earlier, before the riot started, he even told them, if you listen to the video that has been played over and over again by the media, Trump actually incited them because he told them he actually was going to lead the march. He says, well, I'm going to lead you in the march. We're going to go to the Capitol Hill and we're going to take over, and the whole gambit. So while they marched, he sat in the White House or wherever with his family, and they were enjoying everything. So really, that's basically in a nutshell, he is the leader of the mob that invaded the Capitol Hill. And let's bear in mind, it's not just insurrection, right? Treason, sedition, vandalization, right? There's so many crimes. 5 people lost their lives, for crying out loud, right? It's a very serious situation we're facing right now. But the good news is that American democracy will triumph over everything else, right? It will definitely triumph over everything else. And this is a test of democracy.
A test of democracy indeed. Now, dozens of Americans who took part in that protest at the Capitol have been arrested. What kind of charges do you expect the DC administration and federal security operatives to actually charge these arrested citizens with?
Well, good question. There are different charges. There's theft. One stole some furniture from Nancy Pelosi's office. There's violence, there's vandalism, there's violence against police officers, right? So there's assault, of course, on police officers. There's a whole gambit of charges that should be brought against them. This is not, as some people say, chicken stuff. This is serious business. It's just unbelievable, unbelievable. I can't believe it happened on our soil. But like I said, we will triumph.
With these 5 deaths recorded, all right, with these 5 deaths recorded, one would only wish for a charge to be brought against somebody specifically who may have been responsible for each of the deaths or for all of the deaths. Who do you foresee being charged for all of the deaths, or individually, since we do not have proof of individuals actually, killing any of these persons and all of that? What do we do in this kind of situation as a law professor?
Yes, let me also have a caveat. I'm a business trade professor. I'm not a con lawyer, constitutional lawyer, although I'm also an attorney, US and Nigerian trained attorney. So we pay attention, as you know, the business world is paying attention. And from the corporate side, I don't want to deviate from your question. As you know, the corporations just imposed some, ban on providing support to some of the Republicans that voted in favor of the objection to Electoral College in Arizona and Pennsylvania. I'm sure you're listening. So I'm paying attention to that for my business and trade class. But yes, in terms of the 5 death cases on that day, actually there's evidence of, especially with respect to the police officer that was killed. And I think right now they have photographs of some of the alleged culprits. And they've already arrested a few, but you're right, it's going to be very hard. One of the death cases involved actually a woman who was shot by a police officer, right? And she was one of the rioters. So they're going to be looking at whether or not he was justified in shooting her. But he was defending members of Congress, really. So I think he has a case, really, the police officer that shot her. There was another officer who died, a man who was a rioter who died of a heart attack. So I think the question becomes whether or not, you could actually hold Trump accountable for that, given that he incited the violence, right? But that's another story, which is beyond my territory in terms of my expertise in analyzing whether or not he will be held accountable for her death. But the police officer that was killed, And I think 2 police officers were killed. One in particular they've been showing on most of the channels have been, showing it, and so hopefully people will identify who they are and they'll be held accountable for murder. So you're absolutely right. There are possibilities out there, but it was crazy that day. There were just too many people, and the cause and effect is actually something that you could prove. But the question is whether or not you could actually find all the culprits. If their relatives and friends will actually, let the authorities know that they are the ones that committed those offenses. The jury is still out, but the good news is some are actually coming out and revealing who they are, and the authorities are arresting them. So that's good news. Yeah.
America over the years has been hailed as a democracy that's founded on freedom of speech and all of that. And we saw a president here trying to address his supporters, his voters. At what point in time did he deviate? And also we have seen tech companies like Twitter, like Facebook and all of that banning the president from their platform. At what point in time does freedom of speech actually start and end? And should we say these tech companies are actually right, according to the law, to ban a sitting president? Because these are corporates. You're a business professional yourself. These are corporates that are subject to governmental authorities and all of that. Can we have a corporate actually banning the whole president of a country and nothing happens? Isn't that an infringement on the freedom of speech of the president? And was the president also right by engaging on that rhetoric just an hour before Congress sat last Wednesday?
Well, your question is loaded. So let me first tackle the question of whether or not, because I'm a business person, the steps that Twitter and, of course, Facebook took, Mark Zuckerberg, to, suspend Trump's usage of the social media as a weapon of mass destruction, as a weapon of violence. America stands for democracy, as we've rightly talked about earlier. And the First Amendment right to freedom of speech is deeply entrenched in American Constitution. But there are exceptions. You can't use it to incite violence. You can't use it for obscenity. There are limits, right, to how far you can go. So he went beyond, over and above the limits of freedom that was permitted within the First Amendment, right? So the question becomes, yes, he's the president. So does he have the right to do that? The fact that nobody's above the law, right? So he doesn't really have the right to go over and above the limits that have been permitted within the First Amendment, right? So yes, in some ways they were justified. In fact, many members of Congress had been calling for Facebook and Twitter to act long time ago, but they didn't, right? So yeah, it makes sense that they did eventually. But let me tell you this: if you go on Twitter, there's an account that's still open, and I'm wondering why it is. It's a legitimate account. It's the last time I checked, but don't quote me, but you can check this. The POTUS Twitter account is still open. He has not posted since the 6th, what I call the deadly Ash Wednesday attack on Capitol Hill. I don't know if he's lying in waiting, but he hasn't posted. And also Instagram. Mark Zuckerberg owns both Instagram and Facebook. I checked Instagram, and Trump's Instagram account, 24-point-something million people are following him. He has not posted since Wednesday, but the last time I checked, it was still active. So I'm not sure what's going on with Mark Zuckerberg as a corporate lawyer and a professor. I know that he's respecting Trump's rights, to a certain extent. Maybe he's thinking Trump didn't use that Instagram account, a few minutes before the rioters went to Capitol Hill to threaten members of Congress. But I'm still waiting. Or maybe I'm just the only one who has noticed that that account was active up until yesterday. I didn't check it today, but it's still active.
Let's talk about the first question that I asked you previously. At what point did the freedom of speech, the rights to the freedom of speech of the president start, and where should it have ended in that speech he made an hour before Congress met last week to ratify Biden's win? Where should he have stopped?
Well, you have to debate that with con lawyers and, really. But I would think that, it's common sense to me that the point at which it started in terms of his First Amendment rights started when he assumed office, right? And he's he has some privileges as the president to do what he wants to do. But I would think when he made that speech, remember they've been showing the speech he made that day, calling them, saying he's going to lead them in the march to Capitol Hill, right? I would think that at that point, his rights ended, assuming, to me, his rights ended when he assumed office, to be honest with you, because he's been using Twitter as a weapon of intimidation, mass destruction, blackmailing people, inciting violence. However, let's just be reasonable here and be fair, right? And say that it's from the point at which he actually made that speech and said he was going to march with them, right? He fired them up. I'm using President Obama's language, fired up. Remember, they got fired up. So I would think that at that point, he probably should have lost his privileges, you see. But I think that, as you know, in the business world, they thread very carefully. Trump sues everybody. He has over 2,000 lawsuits. So I think it came to the breaking point where they said, no, enough is enough. People have died. You incited violence and 5 people died, right? So that speech, I think, was what was, the last straw, okay? I would say.
Across the world have pointed out the double standards of the American system. Even within the US, a lot of people have been saying that if it were Black Lives Matter protests, that the security services wouldn't even have allowed African Americans to get that close to, the Capitol and all of that. And then, they would have also put up a lot of serious barriers to ensure that they do not even get close to the building itself. What do you make of these allegations that the U.S. system actually is playing double standards here, especially when it comes to, white privileges, being given to white supremacists and all of that? What's your thought on all of those observations?
You're taking me in a territory that's extremely sensitive. Oh, and also, one of the things you didn't mention was that all my views are mine. None of my views should be, imputed to any of my affiliated institutions that I teach. Okay. To answer this question, really, let me use my double minority lens as a Black woman and say that to a certain extent, there's a double standard with respect to the BLM, the Black Lives Matter, and how it's, approached. By law enforcement and the National Guards and all. But let me also say that to be fair to DC Mayor Muriel, that she actually asked for help for the National Guards, but there was a delay. They're currently investigating that, right? And Hogan, who's our governor here in Maryland, who happens to be a Republican, actually deployed National Guards to help. Address the violence, but that was also delayed. Okay, so the question becomes whether or not there are moles in the police force, right? Moles in the police force, moles in Congress in terms of the security, and also decision-making process had some moles that actually prevented the process from being facilitated. In other words, there was a delay in deploying National Guards, right? The bureaucratic process was delayed, right? So yes, definitely, when you look at what happened when Black Lives Matter protested, right? It was crazy. There were many National Guard. It was like a military dictatorship, situation where you had armed guards and everything all over the place, right? So you're absolutely right. But like I said, it's not everybody in the U.S. that holds that view. It's a bipartisan view that some I would say even Mitt Romney was not in support of the violence, right? So there are people out there from a moral standpoint who believe that there should have been, the National Guard should have acted real fast. So the jury is still out there. They're still investigating, why there was a delay. And, we'll see what happens at the end of the road.
Try to round off this conversation because we do not have enough time left. I just want to take you back to the impeachment proceedings and all of that and the activation of the 25th Amendment, which the lawmakers are seeking. Now, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy actually had this quote to say while trying to emotionally plead with his colleagues, the Democrats. He was like that he remains opposed to the impeachment because it will have the opposite effect of bringing our country together when we need to get America back on a path towards unity and civility. In 30 seconds, Prof, what do you make of that statement? Do you think all of this should be put on hold until Trump goes out of the White House on 20th?
I don't think we should put it on hold at all until Trump leaves office. When he leaves office, he's not president anymore, right? And there's so many things that President-elect Biden wants to focus on right now, especially COVID and economic recovery and all. We don't want to be bombarded with impeachment trials and all that post-election.
All right, it's been really good having you here. Professor Val Okaru-Bisant is a professor and a business lawyer. It's been really nice having this discussion with you. I mean, I've learned so much. And we just hope, the proceedings will continue and we get to see how this ends up. Thanks so much for being featured on the show. You're still watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including World Bank projects global economy expansion by 4%. What opportunities are in the offing for African economies? We have analysis. Stay with us.